You're willing to acquire the language skills which are necessary for your professional life, but how many hours does it take to achieve this? Don't forget to subscribe to Lang Explorer to show your support. When you study a language, it gives you more motivation to have a rough estimate of how many hours you need to study to reach a certain level of proficiency. You're more likely to accomplish your goal if you make realistic study plans and you're sure how far it is between where you are now and where you want to go to in your learning. In this video, we'd like to compare the difficulty levels of various languages in terms of the required time to reach the equivalent of B2 level of the CEFR, allowing you to use them for your profession. We hope this video to be helpful so language learners are aware of how much efforts they need to make. There are a number of different languages in the world, some of which are relatively easy to master, while others require years of effort to achieve this goal. The degree of difficulty depends on a number of factors, including the language itself, as well as the learner's native language and whether they're proficient in another one. For example, Russian is generally quite difficult to learn, but it's relatively easy for native speakers of Slavic languages such as Serbian and Bulgarian, which use the same Cyrillic alphabet. Chinese is also generally a tough language to learn due to the complexity of its characters, but it's relatively easy for Japanese speakers as they use similar characters. Given these circumstances, it's essential to recognize that the difficulty level of a language is only relative, so we recommend you to grasp the difficulty level, especially by each learner's native language, to estimate the required time and to have enough time to be dedicated to the study. A famous site that explains the difficulty level of the world's languages is the Foreign Language Training site on the U.S. Department of State website. Obviously, the Department of State has been providing language training for decades for its staff who work at U.S. embassies and consulates worldwide and at its headquarters in Washington, D.C. It has a reasonably accurate understanding of how long it takes for Americans to learn a language. Since only a few websites provide such information today, we'll look at the required time for native English speakers to acquire sufficient linguistic skills. This amount of hours is necessary to reach General Professional Proficiency, equivalent to B2 in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, CEFR. This level isn't enough to have mastered a foreign language yet, but it's enough to perform general tasks in a foreign language. So, we'd like to show you the categories of difficulty according to the Department of State, and then we'll add our analysis. In the case of CEFR B2, the vocabulary size required for this level is between 4,000 and 5,000 words. This site classifies the world's major languages into 4 categories according to difficulty. Category 1 is the easiest for speakers of American English, as their language is similar to English, which means it'll take between 600 and 750 hours to learn. Languages in this category are Germanic or Italic, and while most require 600 hours, it takes 750 hours for French and Spanish. So it takes 24 or 30 weeks to acquire the language skills for your job if you study 25 hours per week. German and some other languages, such as Indonesian, Malay, Swahili, and Haitian Creole, fall into Category 2, requiring 900 hours or 36 weeks of study, which will be discussed next. Category 3, which requires 1,100 hours or 44 weeks of study, includes all other languages except Category 4, described as super hard languages such as Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and Arabic, and it takes 2,200 hours or 88 weeks of study. For native speakers of English, which is a Germanic language, it isn't hard to imagine that other Germanic languages such as Dutch, Swedish, and Danish are easy. But some may wonder why Italic languages such as Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian have the same level of difficulty as Germanic languages. This is because English has accepted a number of words from French and Latin since Norman conquest in 1066, and now it shares more vocabulary with Latin than with Germanic languages. And the reason it takes 750 hours instead of 600 for French and Spanish is the complexity of verb conjugations and, in the case of French, the complexity of pronunciation. Another reason German is the only Germanic language that is particularly difficult among others is its complex declension and verb conjugations. While Dutch and other Nordic languages now have practically lost declensions and simplified verb conjugation, and the masculine and feminine nouns have merged into common nouns, German still retains complex declensions, verb conjugation, and the three gender distinctions of masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns. It has a more complex grammar than other Germanic languages, which is why it has taken more time to master. Languages that don't have much in common with English require 1,100 hours of study, or 44 weeks if you study 25 hours per week, to be able to use it at the professional level, but Malay, Indonesian, and Swahili are exceptionally easy as they have a simple grammar due to their history of development as a lingua franca in the regions where they're used, and their use of the Latin alphabet eliminates the need to learn new characters. On the other hand, Chinese and Japanese have a complex writing system of Chinese characters, and Arabic, in addition to its complicated grammar, has two variants: Standard Arabic, which is used mainly in formal contexts, and a number of colloquial dialects that are quite different each other. In the case of Korean, since only the Hangul alphabet is used today, there's no need to memorize Chinese characters found in Japanese and Chinese, but on the other hand, there are many homonyms and it's difficult to distinguish between them, which makes Korean quite hard to study. For example, the word
경기
means the province around Seoul, race in the sports, and the economic cycle. While reading and writing the Hangul alphabet itself is relatively easy, reading and listening aren't. So far, we've seen how many hours are necessary for native speakers of American English to study a foreign language, but how much time does a non-native English speaker need to reach the same level of English proficiency? According to Education First, a foundation based in Switzerland that works on English education around the world, it takes 720 hours of study for a person with no English proficiency to reach B2, which is about the same level of difficulty as French or Spanish in Category 1 in the ranking by U.S. Department of State. However, there's a note that says, add another 50% to these estimates if you only speak one language and it's a language quite different from English, for example, Chinese, Arabic, Japanese, Korean, so it takes 1,080 hours for native speakers of such languages to brush up their English from 0 to B2, which is a Category 3 according to the U.S. Department of State ranking mentioned above. Most people have already studied to a greater or lesser extent, so the amount of required time is up to the student's current level of English. In addition, native speakers of Chinese and Arabic, among others, often find it useless that languages such as Dutch and Italian are similar to English, as they aren't good at English. So, those languages ranked as Category 1 by the U.S. Department of State and German should also be considered Category 3 in terms of difficulty. On the other hand, similarities can be found between some languages, such as Turkish and Kazakh and Thai and Lao, so in this case, students need less than 1,100 hours to achieve the B2 level. Anyway, it takes a substantial amount of time to study a foreign language, so you need to have an appropriate planning to achieve this goal, and if possible try spending a few months in the country where that language is spoken to accelerate your learning. Now, let's summarize what we've learned today. 1. Language difficulty can't be generalized because it depends on the difficulty of the language itself, as well as the learner's native language or other languages they're fluent, and so on. 2. The U.S. Department of State determines 4 categories of difficulty of foreign languages for Americans, with the easiest, such as Dutch and Italian, requiring 600 hours to develop B2 level language proficiency, and the most difficult, such as Chinese and Japanese, requiring 2,200 hours. Germanic and Italic languages are relatively easy, but it takes 1,100 hours for other languages. 3. According to the Swiss Foundation Education First, it takes 720 hours for a person with no knowledge at all in English to reach B2 level of language proficiency, which corresponds to Category 1 according to the U.S. Department of State, but this number increases to 1,080 hours, corresponding to Category 3, if your native language is quite different from English, such as Chinese and Japanese. 4. The Category 1 languages are considered Category 3 if your native language is very different from English, while the amount of hours is reduced if your native language has similarities with the language you're studying. 5. In any case, it's essential to set aside the time to study the language, as it takes quite a long time to develop the language skills for your profession. Thank you for watching this video. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.